All right, on this Garlic Marketing Show, we're going to talk to a former Googler that started his agency and scaled actually two agencies after that and exited. The bedrock changes that he made to scale his agency that you can do too. The huge sales mistakes that he sees in almost every agency that you can solve with the three W's. The key to becoming better at sales through their co-piling. The most common question you're answering wrong on your sales calls. How to katana your offer and reawakening sleeping leads. You don't really need more leads. And also the most important Dr. Seuss sales book, which I learned myself. All this on the Garlic Marketing Show. We got Aaron Levenstadt from Agency Alliance. Aaron, say hi.
Hey.
And of course, this is brought to you by videocasestory.com. If you want to close 10 more high value sales using video and YouTube and video case stories, go to videocasestory.com 10 and 90, and we'll show you exactly how. All right, let's get started.
My name is Gino Wickman. I was introduced to Ian, and that's what brought me into this video world and got me embracing this video world. And Ian did exactly what I hoped. He got me really comfortable with putting videos out to the world and having a great strategy around putting videos out to the world, because there's so much more than just shooting a video. And so the way that he positions those videos, optimizes those videos, he's done a great job.
All right. I'm excited because I love, talking sales and marketing because they work so well. They're so important to work so well together. And there's so much misinformation, especially for agencies, and consultants. And I want to talk a little bit about how you reactivate lost leads and past clients, and also how you've changed where people are going wrong usually on their sales calls. But before we get into that, Aaron, just tell us a little bit about your background and how you got here.
Sure. So background wise, I did my undergrad out in California at Stanford. And then when I finished my undergrad, there was a role at Google that I jumped into. And that was effectively, I was on the organic and the paid search products at Google. So I helped to work through those and build those products out. And then from there, I, long story short, ended up in a meeting with like a friend of a friend who was working for a national laser eye care center. And we're in the meeting and he pops up like their Google ads, and he'd asked me to take a look at their Google ads account and some of their organic search stuff. And as I got into it, I realized, a couple interesting mistakes. And one of those was they were like inadvertently bidding on animals like cats and dog cataracts and cat and dog like surgery for their eyes. So this came up in the meeting and I was like, hey guys, like, do you guys operate on animals? They're like, well, no. I'm like, okay, well, then you have like huge amounts of your budget that are going towards animal related search terms. And we left that meeting, and that was, eventually became one of our first like landmark clients. And it kind of dawned on me at that time that, in that like 45-minute meeting, probably save them like, I don't know, a couple $1 million, and I had spent on that stuff. So I realized I was very fortuitous in like growing up professionally at Google, and then B, having the opportunity to kind of be able to see those, insights and errors where we could add a lot of value with being able to, run search for our clients and clients that we call partners, we call our partners. So we're able to really unlock a lot of value that way. And that was sort of the beginning of our two firms.
And tell me a little bit about what, your exits and what really you feel got you to the exits.
Yeah. So so I'll talk about, the one exit, the one that the more recent one. I think there's a couple big unlocks there. So one is what we call like two things. One is really getting our sales and marketing completely buttoned up. And I'll talk about sales specifically. So, one of the key mistakes that we see now, and we have a community where we help agencies sort this stuff through. And one of the big mistakes that I made early on and that we see again and again is the ordering of information as it's presented in the construct of the sale, in the pitch. And I literally mean well, two things. One is the actual words that come out of you or your sales team's mouths, and the language that you use, and then the way that it is presented. And this is rooted in human psychology, which for whatever strange reason I've become oddly fascinated with. And I read like a ton on this and a couple other topics, but this is one of the topics I've become super passionate about. The long and short of it is we have like two brains as people. There's a reptilian brain, like the old brain, and then there's the new brain, the cerebral cortex, which sits at the front of the brain, of the head. And you have to be able to get through these two brains. And the way that you have to go through the reptilian brain first. And without getting into the whole science today, this is like, 130 years of psychology. But basically the idea is like, you have to present the information in a way that relaxes the brain of the subject, of your prospect subject. I'm thinking psychology. That relaxes the brain of your prospect and lets you present this structure, the information in a way that really gets into their mind and can get into the more modern part of the human brain. And, okay, well, great, nice psychology lesson, Aaron. Like, what does that actually mean? So the way that we work and coach our members through this is really kind of, you have to structure the call opening up with like 3 key W's or 3 key Y's, or 3 W's. One is, we call like, winter is coming, and the prospect has to understand that there is a change happening in their world that they are not prepared for, that they are sitting flat-footed around, and if they don't figure out how to deal with this change, there is going to be a big problem that they are going to face. So that's one thing that you have to get out on the table. And you as the agency owner or the consultant, you have to put that out. If you're selling at an agency, you have to do that. That's almost the first thing that comes out of your mouth or close to it. The next thing you have to do is you have to establish why they should care. So like, why is that relevant to the prospect? Sometimes it's clear because it could be, and I'm happy to share a couple examples to make it more tangible, but it could be evident out of the gate why they should care, or you have to help them understand, like, this is a very significant problem and they need to wake up, they need to think about it and kind of wake up to it. That's the second part of the construct. And then the third thing that you have to establish is why you, as in why you are the person to help them through to the solution to the problem, to whatever the problem is that you solve. And one of the key mistakes we see in this construct is that these things are not laid out at the beginning. They can sometimes are woven in, sometimes they're not. And sometimes people think, well, they never asked why us, so like we didn't really bring it up. That's a mistake. That's a mistake. And oftentimes we'll see, like, when we start working with members that join our community, they're kind of leading with logos, or they're sitting on more like comfortable footings, in the sense of like, hey, like, we'll develop some rapport out of the gate, we'll spend a few minutes understanding their business, talking about our features and benefits, or putting them through 23 questions to get at the pain. I mean, no, like, we can go into, happy to talk more about any of this today, but you have to get through those things first. This is rooted in the crux of human psychology. And until you get through those 3 key things, you cannot talk about what you do, why you're great. And no matter how great you are, no matter who your clients are, if they're Target and Amazon, even if you had clients like that, you can't bring that up in the conversation until you've gotten other things out on the table. And this is a key sales mistake. And I feel it's so important because it is the bedrock piece of scale, in the sense that if this part isn't handled right, all of the great stuff that you're doing higher up in the funnel, whatever it is that you're doing, like, you're going to conferences, you're networking, you're working with a group like yours, Ian, where you're doing amazing video stuff to bring clients into your orbit. If you don't have this part of it, and you're not dialed in on the conversation that you're having with your prospects and how you're putting this information and the structure of the information, you won't close enough deals to be able to scale. So this is a core component. And of the scale piece of it is arguably the most important part, because everything builds around this. And it's there's a lot of different ways to go off the rails in this, but it is really important to get fully buttoned up and to structure the conversation. And we say, like, when we co-pilot this, when I co-pilot it with members, I'll actually join them on calls, and then we'll talk about, feedback is quite literally both the order, the kind of language that you're using, how compelling you are in this conversation, and it is a critical thing to nail.
I mean, it makes so much sense, right? And I see that all the time where, I mean, in sales in general, where people are leading with features, benefits, like you said, logos, names, and no one cares about that until they understand why they should be talking to you, right?
No one cares about it until they understand why they should be talking to you. And then, when the other part of it, which I mentioned on earlier, is we'll see things like, well, we get on with the prospect and we go through our list of questions to like understand their pain. And this is also a mistake. Like, you should know their pain. Like, and your prospects don't have 99 different kinds of problems that you solve. They shouldn't. So okay, there's some nuances. And, in my world, because it was search, it was like, okay, well, maybe, one prospect, their concern is on one keyword family, another for a different business. But at the end of the day, the problem that they're having is that they're not discoverable productively on search. So you got to go into the conversation knowing that is the problem that your prospect is there to talk to you about. And, one question I get when I talk about this is like, well, what happens if I put the problem on the table, but it's not the problem the prospect's having, or they don't feel that, right? That's not the most pressing issue. They are going to thank you for trying to get at the problem without putting them through the 23 question opening gambit that nobody should be doing in this world with LinkedIn and AI and the ability to understand, basically what your prospect is going through and what. Again, I'll just use my world. When it came to search and search discoverability, like, if that's not the problem, what are we talking about? What else are we going to talk about? What else are we talking about? Sports? Or what else are we talking about? So that's I think that's another important piece of it. And we see that, we should be asking these questions to get them to talk about their problems and their pain. Like, no, like you got to know that going in, and you got to be clear on, hey, like, this is, we assume we're here to talk about this problem, right? And that's, I think, another piece of that puzzle.
It's an interesting way to put it, right? Because I mean, I do it like it, but I feel like full on discovery sessions are, are kind of gone the way of the past. I like to know, how they're trying to solve the problem. But what other, because you're doing this awesome thing, co-piling, tell us a little bit about that. So when someone joins Agency Alliance, and you can go to joinagencyalliance.com to learn more. Tell us about the co-piling that you do with them.
Yeah, so we will literally, oftentimes if they have sales conversations or sales talking tracks, we'll take a look through that. If they have a sales playbook, we go through that. You should be recording calls. If you're not recording calls today, you absolutely should be on Zoom or Otter or Fathom or your phone or your MP3 player, whatever you're using. You got to be recording your calls. And I'll just a little sidetrack and I'm getting back. But when I was doing this, like, I've gotten very good at this, but I don't see myself, never seen myself as a natural born salesperson. And I was, in my scale journeys and then exits, I was devout about this. I would record every sales conversation that I had. I would go for long walks after these conversations and I would listen to the conversation. Like, where did this fall off? Where did it not resonate? And that helped me develop this construct that we co-pilot today. So the answer to your question about how does it work? So we basically get your audio. We start giving you feedback on the audio. I start giving you feedback on the audio. Then we will actually join you as hey, here's Aaron and he's part of, the sales conversation. And we will actually join you. And sometimes we'll actually jump in and help through that sale where we see it's relevant to do so. And other times we'll just listen, fly on the wall, and we'll chat with you after and say, listen, this is my take on that sale construct. We got to go back to figure out, so another thing that comes up in these co-piloting sessions is, this is something that we see all the time, is you have this construct. We talked about the importance of creating the landing page equivalent of the conversation, because it's not structured visually. You're having a Zoom or a phone or whatever. There's no visual cue to the structure. So what will happen is they'll be in the pitch, and then the prospect will jump in and be like, hey, listen, a minute in, they'll be like, listen, guys, I just want to understand what you do and how much you charge. And a natural instinct. It is very natural. One may just kind of, hey, I should just answer that because they asked. That's a mistake. And it's a mistake I made many times. And if I looked at it, and we do win-loss analyses, it often 97% of the time came back to like how we presented the information in the pitch. So this is an example of, you wouldn't answer that question outright. You'd say something more along the lines of like, hey, Mrs. or Mr. Prospect, listen, we got 33 minutes on the clock today. We got a lot to get through. We spent some time thinking about your world. I want you to understand what we do top to bottom. If you don't mind, let me kind of walk through some really key important pieces of the puzzle. And I promise we're going to have time today to go through any questions you want to ask. But before we get to that Q&A, let me walk through some important pieces of the puzzle. So you are redirecting and you're not answering the question at that point in time. And this seems like sometimes when I explain this, it seems like, oh, well, maybe kind of minor. Like, why wouldn't I just answer the question? The problem with that is you are quite literally trying to swim against the tide of human psychology in doing that. So it is not a little thing. It is, the whole thing. I mean, other things matter too. Like obviously you gotta have your chops about you. I'm sure you're great at what you do, and that all has to be there. But it's not a little thing. It's a massive piece of this is and that's something that we see when we're co-piloting, and we'll be able to kind of help and coach the folks that we're co-piloting through. I'm co-piloting through it. That comes up often.
Yeah, I mean that's always the first questions, right? What do you do, and how much it costs? Why do you feel that should not be? Why is that swimming against the tide of human psychology?
So, okay, it goes back to what we talked about earlier with you have to drop a construct around the call of the meeting, whatever caller meeting. So you have to do that for reasons that are deeply, deeply rooted in how the human brain works. I mean, the human brain, especially when you first meet somebody, like it only cares about like 2 or 3 things. Like kind of like, am I in danger? Is this person going to like tackle me and hurt me? And or like, is there like is this going to be like a great interdependent exchange of whatever we're going to go through? So you have to get through that piece of it first. And as you start going through the different layers of the human brain, you can have conversations around like, well, how much does this cost? Because of course there's like an exchange here of, money for whatever it is, value that you're creating for your clients. But if it comes up too early, you are disrupting the way that the brain absorbs information. And the meat and potatoes of what you do and why you do it and why they should care is that pathway of connection into their brain has now been frustrated because you've allowed for a piece of the conversation that doesn't flow. It's against the grain of human psychology. So that is a big piece of why that matters and why the ordering of the information in the pitch, thinking of it like a landing page or thinking of it in the sense of dropping a very clear construct around how that meeting unfolds and then running it in that way. This actually makes the prospect 99.8% of the time just feel more comfortable. So they don't know what they're getting into on the call. But when you go to the call and you're like, hey, listen, you may say something like this, like, hey, listen, we only got 30 minutes today. We got a lot to get through. I have this call like 4 times a day. Let me take you through the best way to run the call. And then here's the 3 things that we're going to do. And then as we get towards the end of the call, we're going to decide together if this resonates. I'll take you through a range of investment options. and then we can decide if it makes sense to talk further. And if it doesn't, hail fellow, hail fellow, well met, no harm, no foul. Either way is fine. By doing that, you are instilling this sense of, okay, like this is going to be a productive and interesting and hopefully fun conversation versus the like, hey, like let's get on the call, let's try to, what is it you're interested in, what's the problems you're going through. And the prospect is almost, they're getting a little nervous of like what they're going into and how that call is gonna unfold. So that's a big piece of that puzzle. I'm happy to tease more around this, but does that answer that part of the question?
Oh yeah, no, that's amazing. And so now you're structuring the sales call better. Are there any other insights you were mentioning before the show that like there was a few other key things that were in? Because I want to talk a little bit, towards the end about really get into reactivating lost leads, but with coming into sales and marketing, when did you figure out that sales marketing needed to be the big thing that you need to focus on to scale your agency? And B, what were some of the other key points that you learned that really, shifted things into high gear?
So I'll give an answer here that might cut both of those questions, and then feel free to jump in and we can talk more about either one of them. But I think this one may address both. So there were points in time, especially early on in my adventure, where we would be doing all different kinds of work. So there was, website development, and there was some general strategy. We were doing like some business consulting. We were doing SEO and PPC, and then media buying on different platforms. And what I came to understand was both because the market was changing in terms of what it was looking for, and also as it became more important, and I think this is super important today, to create differentiation in terms of what you do and how you do it as a firm. What I learned was, and call this like another big unlock, was the importance of katanifying the offering. So by that I mean, like, there's this Japanese sword called the katana, which is like only used for like one purpose. I frankly forget exactly the purpose, but whatever it was, it is this thing that you only use in this one ceremony, in this one Japanese ceremony at this one time for this one tradition, and you don't use it for anything else. So what we learned, and what was a massive unlock, and this comes up a lot in the community side of our scale community, was how do you become a super specialist in what you do? And this weaves into the sales conversation in the sense that you are going to create very clear differentiation, and we created a very clear differentiation between what we do and what we don't do and why. So I'll give like a quick example. So as we undertook this course of super specialization, in the sense that we would only deal with search. So by the end of my trajectory, that's all we did. It was the sole channel that we focused on. And our positioning was, we were there to help you as a business get most productively discovered and to drive as many leads as possible from search, period. And then we would say things like, we don't shoot TikTok stories, we don't run radio ads, we don't put up billboards on the 101. Nothing wrong with any of those things. They're just not what we do. And then we'd have a little bit of fun with it. And I would say, and people would be like, oh, but like you could, hey, like, but you guys are doing our search. And the client would come back and they'd want to be like, but can you just also kind of run our social ads, because we're doing Facebook, and it's like, part of our digital ecosystem. And what I figured out in terms of running these conversations and getting a lot of reps in, and then training a sales team, is the answer to that question of we'll give you more money, can you just run our social ads at the same time? The answer to that is no. And it is like, that's depending on where you are in your trajectory, that can be hard because you're saying no to money. And again, we would have some fun with this, where we got to the point where we would say like, hey, listen, like, I appreciate your asking us to do that. But in the same way that, if you wanted to pay me to enter a ping pong tournament for you, like I could not do that because that would be a bad use of resources. It would be an unfortunate capital allocation decision for you guys. You probably don't want to watch me play ping pong even for free, right? In the same way, I also can't take money to shoot pool because I'm not. There are a lot of things that I and my team are not good at, but search, that one thing, we're going to knock out of the park for you. And you've created
Yes.
this distinction. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I love that. I mean, it's really important. Um, you know, and because what would you respond to people like, I want full service. I want a full service agency.
Okay, I totally understand. I actually know a guy over at DDBO. I know a guy at Ogilvy. They do the full service. Deloitte. They'll, you guys will, you might have the conversation today with one of their big partners that does the full service thing, and then, you'll probably, mid-market firm your size. Unfortunately, you probably are going to be dealing with like interns, guys that started yesterday, and they'll kind of help you try to figure out the whole full service thing. But I know a guy over there. I know Greg. He's a good guy. I will put you on an email with him right now. If that's what you're looking for, if you're not interested in somebody who can specialize and really dial in and nail it on this channel, and you really want the full service and the jack of all trades, Greg's a great guy. He's really nice. I'll put you on an email with him.
Yep, that's great. And so you did that, and then we were discussing before, you also start to really reactivate lost leads, because I think a lot of agencies, I don't know, maybe you don't, maybe you see this, maybe you don't, they all think they need more leads, and I feel like most of them don't need more leads, and they all say also, well, I close 90% of the people I talk to. How do you feel about those two things before we get into reactivating the lost leads?
I mean, I agree with you on the first point. I think oftentimes agency leaders and owners have a lot of different conversations about what they do in all different aspects of their life. You could be, at conferences, at networking events, they have first calls that, for whatever reason, don't lead to a second call. I don't know how they're keeping that scorecard on the 90%. If they're closing 90% of the leads and they have regular lead flow, then, I mean, great on them. But that is very rare. And it is certainly outside of any kind of, if you look at the research, and there's a lot of research done on this topic, and ProServe and agencies, that would be a hugely aberrational, right? If they were doing that. If they're doing that, it's great. But I think, for the norm, if you're closing like 20%, 30% of your conversations, if you're killing it, maybe you're closing half. But that means in that conversational transaction, in transaction, I mean like flow of that conversation. But then what happens is, you're going to have people that just don't convert at that point in time for a variety of reasons. Some of them are completely outside of your control. They weren't as qualified as you might have thought at that point in time. They just legitimately love the work that Garlic Studios does, and they see it. They have a budgetary system that doesn't get unleashed till next year, next month, or 6 months, whatever. So the problem is, they love you and they want to work with you, and you've developed a great relationship that just doesn't materialize into an actual engagement at that exact point in time. And then what we see happening is, well, more often than not, that just, if it sits on an Excel sheet, or hopefully you're using a CRM, and it's sitting in a CRM, and then it is just, there's no protocol, and there's no system to what we call awaken that sleeping lead. Because it's just a lead that went to sleep. It doesn't mean they don't want to work with you, but there's no programmatic system. There's nothing being done to just tap. And, sometimes we use like the Prince Charming kiss to reawaken that sleeping lead. And that's, and it is, if you do develop this, in your own systems, or anybody you'd like to discuss this, I'm happy to chat it through more. in more detail, but it is a much, much, much easier thing to do than trying to go after cold leads that you've never had a conversation with. Like, way easier, because these people you've talked to, they just they need to be reawoken, and they need to be reawoken in the right way, right? Don't shake them awake, but they're don't shake them too hard while they're sleeping, but reawaken them in the right way. And there's a way of doing that, and it is a huge scale unlock.
And so there's no magic kiss like Sleeping Beauty to bring them awake. You shouldn't kiss them awake.
There's no silver bullet, but it often takes like it's funny. I have my kids. I have 2 kids, 4 and 2 years old, and they both are still interested in like Dr. Seuss books. And if you haven't read this in a while, if you don't have kids that are this age and you haven't read this in a while, reread Green Eggs and Ham. It is maybe one of the best books on sales ever written. So reread the book, and if you aren't going to do that right now, and give some context, is like there's really like 2 characters to the story. There's one character who has this like meal that he's prepared or ostensibly prepared that is green eggs and ham, and then there's another character in the story that he's trying to get that person to eat the food. So he's trying to sell them the food, and the entire story is like all the different ways that he tries to position the food in a way that the other person is going to take it and eat the food. And, he goes through all different forms of follow-up, and it takes, and then the irony of the story is the other person is like, I'm not going to like it. I'm not going to like it. I don't think I'm going to like it. I don't know if it's for me. And then by the time he finally tastes it, he's like, oh man, this is incredible. Thank you so much for being so passionate in your follow-up. I don't think Dr. Seuss used that exact turn of phrase, but that's the idea, right? And that's the story. And it's a great story because you got to remember what's the expression? The fortune is in the follow-up, right? You got to stay on top of these. You got to stay on the same way that character did in Dr. Seuss and Green Eggs and Ham. Is you got to stay on top of it, because when they taste what you have, you are probably, I'm sure, like if you're listening to this pod, you're great at what you do. And you just got to get them to take a bite.
Yep. And so tell me a little bit about how you help the reactivation leads. What are some of the keys that you do when people are in the program with you in the Agency Alliance to help reactivate those sleeping leads?
So basically deploy the system that I used in my firms to reactivate leads. So we had built out a system. It's a cadence that includes a combination of like email and SMS and different touch points at different frequencies with different conversational construct to those frequencies. And we basically get a little bit of context from CRM in terms of like how, what the conversation was about. Obviously the people that were involved in the conversation. And then we take that information and we put it through a system that will, for periods of time, just very conversationally tap people on the shoulder and be like, hey, Ian, it's been a minute. Like, how are you? How's business? Right? Like, oh, by the way, like I remember when I was in your office and I saw that purple sign. Like, you guys still have that? And you can do these little conversational constructs where like you're going to reply, be like, oh, I can't believe you remember that. Right? Like, even though we're not doing business yet, we haven't engaged. There's been no engagement yet, but you're able to drop these messages where you're showing that like you care and you're touching base with somebody because you genuinely care about how they're doing in their business, and that should come from should come from a place of genuineness. Like you care about people that are in your orbit, and you also are just every now and then like nudge them on like just to use for my example of like, hey, like I know you guys. Hey, I love the office. I love what you guys do with it. I still remember that purple sign. And by the way, like, if you guys got to get that discovered more often, like hint, hint, nudge, nudge, right? Like, whatever makes sense to chat, let me know. And then every now and then you're going to pipe back and be like, you know what? It actually makes more sense. Where's your calendar link?
Yes.
So these kind of constructs, that's what we're talking about.
That's fantastic. And you've developed a software that does a lot of this?
Yeah. So we have our own system that we can deploy to do it. It is software that manages a combination of the SMS and the email, and it will also digest from any CRM effectively, even an Excel sheet, like any notes or anything about the context of the conversations, and then it will help create those constructs and help set them up.
Is this available only if you're an Agency Alliance member?
Today, it's only available to members of the community.
All right.
So as of today, it's a member benefit. I think anybody who's interested in that offering is very likely going to be interested in the core scale support and resource and people that we bring into the community. But that being said, it's a community offering today.
All right. Yeah. And if someone wants to join, they can go to joinagencyalliance.com. Who's the ideal fit for Agency Alliance, like as far as agencies? And folks, I mean, I know we're talking agencies, but if you're selling anything over $2,000, this pertains to you. You're a lawyer, doctor, dentist, agency, consultant, this all pertains to you. But coming back, who's the perfect digital agency for Agency Alliance?
So this is a great question, and it's one that we've given a lot of thought to. What we've found is this construct adds the most value for a specific kind of disposition. So what do I mean by that? And I'll give some hard metrics too at the end of this, but typically you want to have, at least reasonable revenue run rate, a couple other things. But really, it is for people that have a certain mental state. And the way that we have discerned these mental states and the way that we think about them is kind of the difference between a wood chopper and somebody who wants to operate and probably eventually sell a sawmill. And these are two very different things. So the wood chopper will get up in the morning, go to the backyard, we'll chop wood, we'll put the wood on their back, we'll take the wood to market, we'll sell some of the wood, we'll come home, say hi to the family, go to sleep, wake up the next day, and do a lot of the same. That is very different from the person who is running the sawmill, who operates a sawmill with team and systems and structures, putting the wood through the sawmill operations, regularly stepping back and thinking about how to proceduralize the operational constructs, kind of like Michael Gerber, E-Myth. Like, you got to step back and be the engineer. Think about the right people that you want to put on the right seats on the bus, and then swap those people around and interject processes as to how they communicate and interact with one another while they're on the bus. That's a sawmill operator. So it is for the sawmill operator. It is not really for the wood chopper. And sometimes when I explain this, there's like a connotation I in no way mean to imply that one is not better than the other. They are just different. And you might be totally fine with the wood chopper approach. And I mean, the difference is you won't have an asset that you can sell and create like significant generational or multi-generational wealth from. But if what you want to do is the wood chopper, that's totally fine. Some people might call that a lifestyle business. If you want to, on the other hand, get to the point where you have a sawmill and that asset is sellable and you can sell it for multiples of revenue or earnings, and you can at some point bring in 10 to 15 times that revenue in a single day, or EBITDA in a single day, or single transaction at some point in the future. That is who this is for. It's for somebody that wants to scale and understand how to create those scale motions, which start from the actual sale, like the going back to what we talked about earlier, the actual things that you say and don't say in the sale, and then how do you build a sawmill around that. So that is really the distinction as to who it's for versus who it is not going to be a great fit for.
Awesome. So put a link to that, joinagencyalliance.com. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. Aaron, where's the best place to follow you?
LinkedIn is probably the best. It's probably where, social media wise, is where I'm most active. The website, you mentioned joinagencyalliance.com. You can get me on email. It's my first name, Aaron, at joinagencyalliance.com. That's good too. It's probably the best.
Awesome. We'll put links to all that in the show notes. Aaron, thanks so much for being on the Garlic Marketing Show.
Thank you very much for having me.
And thank you all for making Aaron and I part of your story. This has been On Garlic and the Garlic Marketing Show.